Good evening. It's 7:04 p.m., and today is Wednesday, December 7th, 2022. This is a hearing for the Speedway Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm Tim Ramian, the chairman of the BZA. In attendance this evening, to my left is Curtis Miller, vice president. To his left is Steve Jones, our secretary, and to my right is Philip Faust, a member. Our fifth member, Janet Fullen, was unable to be here this evening. Also in attendance is Eder Lopez, our recording secretary. Eder, have all who wish to speak been sworn in? Okay. I ask that everyone please silence your cell phones. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, it's been quite a few months since we've had a BZA hearing, so I'd like to go over the rules. The presenter of the petition, any remonstrators, and any proponents will each have 15 minutes to present evidence or their opinions. Following their presentations, we will hear a staff report from our representative from Etica. After the staff report, we will allow up to 5 minutes of rebuttal from each, 5 minutes each from the petitioner, any remonstrators, and any proponents. So the first item of business this evening will be the approval of the meeting minutes from our January 5th, 2022 hearing. Board members, do you have any questions or corrections to the minutes?
No.
No? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion to approve them?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved 4-0. Okay, the next item of business is the petition DVS, 2022 DVS 002 for 1805 Girard Avenue and 5228 Crawfordsville Road, establishing two dwellings on a single lot. Will the petitioner or the representative please approach the podium and state your name and your address?
Thank you, Chairperson Ramian and Dave. My name is David Gilman. My address is 211 South Ritter Avenue, Suite H, Indianapolis 46219. I do represent the petitioners. I do have Dean Ergott and Jim Nickel. They are here in the audience. They are the new owners of this property. So I've provided you a handout, and I believe there is a slide that might be available on the overhead. If you'll go to the second slide, please. So this property is literally down the road from where we're meeting tonight. It's located at the northeast corner of Crawfordsville Road and Girard Avenue. It's right on the corner. You'll see two addresses on the overhead. The address 5228 goes with Crawfordsville Road. The address 1805 goes with Girard Avenue. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit more clear aerial photograph of the existing conditions on the property. The main house faces Crawfordsville Road but gains access from a stone drive off of Girard. The second home has access from the alley, but it too has frontage on Girard Avenue. Next slide, please. This is a view of the property from Girard Avenue. You'll see the smaller house off the alley identified on the overhead as 1805. That unit was established in 1964 as a single-family dwelling. You'll see where the car's parked, you'll see the main house, which was established around 1948. The site is zone D5. The D5 requires a 15-foot rear yard setback, 900 square feet of main floor area for a single-story dwelling. The rear yard is defined as the opposite of the street frontage, or in this case, Girard Avenue. We're asking for this board to consider legally establishing the smaller dwelling with a rear yard that would be 7 feet and a living floor area of 543 square feet versus the required 900 in today's standards. Next slide, please. This is a survey that was done on 4/19/2016, which clearly shows both of these structures are identified as single-story homes, and it shows the setback to the east for the smaller home in the rear at 7 feet, and the setback from the smaller home on 1805 at 19 feet, with a stone drive off Girard for the main home to the frontage of Crawfordsville Road. The reason I wanted to survey as part of an exhibit for the history of this property, it clearly identifies these units as being separate livable dwellings. Next slide, please. At the very beginning of my research on this property, this is commonly referred to as a yellow card, and it was something that was shared with me with your utility department. The yellow cards were handwritten cards that sort of established dates of connection to the waterworks utilities in the town of Speedway. If you look at this particular card at the top, it talks about 1805. It calls it East Girard Street. We recognize it today as Avenue, but the date of connection for the unit at 1805 was 8/28 of 1964. The water service connection, the last entry on the card, you may see it as 1986. The reason it terminated at 86 is that's when Speedway went automated and all the yellow cards were eliminated and everything went onto the current computer system. I did confirm with the staff in the utility department at that time that 1805 has always maintained a separate water service and bill from the main residence at 5228. Next slide, please. When you have a use that's been on this property for, in our case, 53 years, there is a couple of avenues to try to legally establish or get that use recognized or to get a setback that may not meet standards legally established. And one of them is you do a long history and a lot of research through the Haynes Crisscross directories or Polk directories down at the state archives. You get affidavits from neighbors who know the property well, and you get utility bills and things that we've submitted. What we've done is this Polk directory started out at 1969, and you can see where a KG Exum lived there and at this address at 1805, starting at 1969. Now, what I did is when I went down to the state archives, I looked at all 53 books, but they're about the size of a briefcase. And when you take them off the shelf, you're not allowed to put them back on the shelf. That's their policy. So I had books, I had 30 of them, and I needed to go through another 30, so I'd had 60 books off the shelf. So what I did is I provided to the file, and I have records of these to share if you need to for the file, of every 5 years. But I did look at all 57 or 53 years. And that's one method that you could go through legally establishing something. And the other, obviously, affidavits and things like that. The other method is to come to the Board of Zoning Appeals and show them similar evidence or the same evidence, but I didn't have to go through months of research and have documents of every single year, every single directory, and it's 3 pages per directory. So it had been about, 180 sheets of documentation through the Haynes. When I wanted to present to this board enough evidence that we could ask this board to go ahead and acknowledge the fact that we've proven our case that this structure has been at this property and has been used and recognized as a single family for some 53 years. We did supply with our variance file all the aerial photography going back from 1962 to present day, and I have the same year span of these directories on my E-drive that I could share if anybody needed me to add that to the file just for history and record keeping. Next slide, please. So whenever you ask for, say, a rear yard setback that's 15 feet and you want it to be 7, well, the building, as you see right on the corner toward the top of that corner lot, nothing's changed since 1962. But it's difficult for me to convince you that that's a 7-foot side yard setback from a grainy photo back to 1962. That's why sometimes these aerial photographies over the years, they weren't the best. There's a lot of trees in the way. It may have been in the summer. We do have all of them, and some of the years are very crystal clear, some are not. But again, we have plenty of evidence that the structure and what this would represent, the structure has been in this location. You could see it's close to the adjacent property line. You could see it's relatively close to the alley, and it really hasn't changed in its configuration to present day. And that's the illustration that I wanted to share with you on this slide. Next slide, please. So we're asking the board tonight to grant us and acknowledge that there are 2 single-family dwellings on this parcel, one addressed at 1805 Gerard, one addressed at 5228 Crawfordsville. And the second dwelling was established on the parcel as a single-family home from its original construction on or around 1964. There's over 50 years of Haynes Directory and 60 years of aerial photography that are available to the file to help establish the use and the setbacks as it exists today. The subject site has separate utility services since 1964 and has recently been videoed, and the lateral is in good working condition. The video has been sent to the town engineer for his records. The non-conforming setbacks and dwelling footprint were both established with the construction of the dwelling and have not been changed. 5, relocating the dwelling to comply with current setbacks or to enlarge to a minimum footprint would be very difficult and present an unnecessary hardship on the property and to the property owners. The single-family residential use is still compatible with the immediate area and will not interfere with the land use recommendations of the comp plan for single-family in this area. With that, we would open up questions to the board members or members of the audience that you would have of me or my clients at this time.
Who wants to start?
So for clarification purposes, this area is not zoned for that structure to be habitable, essentially, is what you're telling us. And if we do not approve this, nobody will be able to live there, essentially? Or is that not the case?
That's not necessarily the case. What's not permitted is to have 2 homes on one lot. And that's what we're asking you to approve, is to have 2 dwellings, one established in 48, one established in 64, that have never been subdivided or parceled off.
So, Mr. Gilman, how does this differ from a granny flat or an in-law quarter?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It really doesn't. When this was built, I believe the original design, from what I'm hearing from the neighbors, has always been that there's been an apartment or a living quarters in it. There may have been a 10-foot garage door that was added to the living space at one time, but it's always been established as an in-law quarters. And I think through the years, we have affidavits where people that lived in the main house, their family members, as they sort of grew up, went to college, got work jobs, lived there as the part of their residence as an apartment.
The other question that comes, I'm sorry, Steve, if you,
No,
okay. The other question that came to mind is, and I'm familiar with the concept of granny flats and in-law quarters, but I don't know that those have separate addresses or if they're on separate utilities in general. And I know for Marion County and Speedway, I don't think there's any restrictions other than what we have in our code today.
I do know the newer homes that I'm getting approved in Indianapolis on the smaller urban lots that they want to put the big 3-story homes and they want that 750 square feet of in-law quarters, they do require a separate address, and they don't necessarily require separate meters. But for 911 and emergency calls, they want to know. I think they're doing like, say, an A and a B, but they do want to know, they do want them to have separate addresses.
Okay.
And I think this one is clearly identified. One's Girard, one's Crawfordsville.
Correct, right, okay. Philip or Steve, do you have questions?
No, not at this
Mr.
point.
Gill?
Sir, if we, maybe it'd be easiest if we're looking at the survey report, just to help me orient
Okay?
a little bit, but I'm also sort of referencing the staff report as well, and just hoping maybe you can kind of help me orient myself here, but you refer to, I guess, a 7-foot, and that's between, I guess, the fence line with the adjoining property and then the side of what would be the Girard house.
Yes.
Is there a separate issue of the distance from Girard, or not Girard, I guess the alleyway in the front of the house that's picked up in the staff report? Or?
It is, and is it Mitch? Yes. Yeah, Mitch and I discussed that. So when you have a lot on a corner, two public frontages or two public rights of way, so we have an alley and Girard. Girard is the public street frontage for that particular unit. Opposite the front is the rear. So that's where the back of that unit off Girard is the rear yard at 7 feet versus 15. They have a new section in the walkability development standards in Indianapolis. Now, instead of having two fronts, you have a front off Girard and a corner side. And that corner side is 8 feet and not 25 feet. So in this instance, Girard would have a 25-foot setback. The alley would have a corner side of 8. Opposite the front would be the adjacent property to the east at 7, 15 being required.
Okay, and so as illustrated by the survey report, the corner, as you referred to it, looks like it's 19 feet, so that suffices under that
Yeah,
standard.
and that's why I didn't ask for a variance to
And
that
it's-
standard.
If we go out to Girard, it's more than the 25 feet.
It's 77. Yeah.
And then, basic questions.
Oh, no,
here.
no, we're
But as I understand it, you've applied both for the variance of use and the variance of development standards.
And I did that only because I'm here in front of this board at a public hearing, and I felt it was important if I'm asking for development standard variances, that I want to make sure that we cover all of our bases. And the second single-family dwelling on this corner lot, even though they have separate addresses, separate utilities for over 53 years, gets acknowledged and approved by the board, so that we have documentations for these gentlemen and subsequent owners that everything is legit. As opposed to, well, here's a history of, stacks of paper that we can prove it. I wanted to make sure that I could present that to this board, and this board would acknowledge that history and documentation and grant us the approval.
And just to follow up on that, so one of the key differences between those has to do with the hardship finding that we have to find here. And I think kind of maybe going to the earlier question of, if we don't grant this, what is the practical hardship bottom line that's going to be faced by your client?
The hardship, as I see it, we have a dwelling that is acknowledged and is being used, but doesn't meet the minimum setbacks and doesn't meet the requirement to have its place on a lot with another home. And it's not that denying the variance in essence would always cause hardship for us to try to convince that this is a single-family house, it's an in-law quarters, or it's a second home, and it's allowed to be there. unless I have acknowledgement by a board of competent jurisdiction like the BZA here in Speedway, then it's just a matter of us going back and forth and providing stacks of our paperwork. So anybody who wanted to occupy that, if it were even to be sold, subsequent owners of this property would always have a question that needs to be dealt with. So the hardship is we would not really be able to use it without some resolve of getting it established as a home or as a dwelling, not a detached garage, because it's never been that, and that it has setbacks that are less than what normally would be required to today's standards.
So if you were to go to sell this property, would the title insurance company insure it, or?
I don't know. These gentlemen are new owners. The first thing they did is they said, hey, you know, we got a situation we need your help with. We have 2 houses on one property. And I said, well, this is how we need to clear it up. I don't know if you guys had any issues with title insurance or have not even gotten that far yet.
No, yeah, sure, but there was no issues. Nobody brought it to their attention.
I lost my train of thought, what I was going to ask. But the bottom line is we really don't know what happened back in 1964, how this was even allowed to happen. Because I guess that's unretrievable information that we'll never know if it slipped under anyone's eyes for building, that it was, you know, not technically a standard dwelling, so to speak. We really don't know that, do we?
No, I have 2 theories. One, the ordinance really wasn't codified till 1969.
Oh.
So nobody was really even paying attention to any of this stuff. Secondly, this is a corner lot, and typically you would have a duplex, or you would be allowed to have a duplex on a corner lot. It may have gotten through that way. Well, on a corner lot, you're allowed 2 units or 2 homes. And that's the only thing I can think of. The other thing is it was built as a in-law quarters with the main house, and again, it was prior to the zoning standards that came up with the 900 square feet, that came up with the setbacks, that came up with only 1 primary use per lot.
So D5 does allow a duplex, doesn't it? I think
D5-2 does now.
D5-2, okay.
Yeah. They've changed. There's walkability standards that they've kind of played around with some of what you and I had remembered to be true, and a couple years ago, I think has changed a little bit. I think Mitch has that in his staff report. He's identified what is permitted.
And I'll ask him that.
Yeah.
So, does anyone have any other questions for Mr. Gilman? Okay, thank you. Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead.
Sir, just also, again, referring back to the staff report there, it did raise a potential issue about off-street parking. If I'm looking at the photograph, it appears to me that there's some sort of driveway by that tree that would potentially service the Crawfordsville Road address, and then there's, you know, I guess a small driveway again in front of the Girard address. Is that?
There is. Off the alley, there's 19 feet that will be able to hold at least 3 cars completely off the alley. And off of Crawfordsville, there's a stone drive that was shown on the survey that it's probably 40, 50 feet long, and it could park 2 or 3 cars easily as well. But it would not deny parking to the front main house should the variance be granted. They both have now and have had independent parking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gilman. If we could have our representative from Attica, please, for the staff report. And please state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Mitch Rector, and I'm representing Attica Group. Here did the staff report. We're at 8720 Castle Creek Parkway, Suite 400, Indianapolis 46250. So I went through the zoning standards and identified the requirements for a detached house. And what I've found is Similar to what David had already mentioned, neither residence currently meets the minimum 900 square foot floor area for a primary dwelling as individual buildings. I suppose if they do count together, then it would exceed that, which would make sense for one lot. Let's see. There we go. So I guess similar to what David had said, while the 1805 Girard Avenue is more than 25 feet from, has more than 25 foot frontage from Girard Street, the actual front door of the house is off the alley, which is only 19, which would be less than 25 if you do count it in that direction. And also, I guess looking at the gravel drive that is in place for the 5228 Crawfordsville residence, from some of the pictures that it looked just like a desire path or an area that they're just parking on rather than ever being a true driveway, which wouldn't meet a off-street parking requirement. But if both lots are if the lot remains for one residence, then the parking would be permitted for the rear lot, for the rear residence. In any case, so since the setback is less than the 25 foot for the proposed 1805 Girard Avenue, neither dwelling is at least 900 square feet, and off-street parking is not exactly clear with Girard Avenue. It is my recommendation to deny the variance.
Questions? Any questions for Mitch?
No, not at the moment.
So I apologize if I didn't hear correctly. Did you say the main house that faces Crawfordsville Road is less than 900 square feet also?
I believe it is. I believe it was only 700 some. Don't have that.
I think,
I believe I had that written on a different sheet of paper here.
738 square feet according to
he
the.
just did some math from the survey.
Yeah.
738 square feet, okay. But again, this house was built in 1948 or that era, so that may not have been an issue back then.
Right, but if you're looking at the variance now,
Right.
I guess it would make sense to me to have some sort of addition to that to bump it up to 900.
Okay. Philip or Curtis or Steve, any questions for Mitch?
I guess I didn't catch what you said about the drive.
Sorry, I was a little mixed up on that. So the survey drawing does show a quote stone drive unquote for the 5228 Crawfordsville Road residence, but it did not appear to be a true driveway with how that lot was originally put together, because it looks like the original intended off-street parking is from that alley, which is only for the smaller residence or the smaller building. So if that lot were split, it would eliminate access to that off-street parking for the 5228. Even though that stone drive is there, I'm not sure it's ever considered a true off-street parking for that house.
Okay.
Okay. Well, and some of the historic pictures, they do show a vehicle, and it looks like it might be gravel. It's hard to decipher from these photos, but, okay. So Any other questions for Phil? I'm sorry, Mitch? We can always bring him back. So now I'd like to ask any members of the audience that have been sworn in that wish to speak. Okay, Mitch, you can sit down now.
Thank you.
We may call you back up if we need you.
Good evening, John Merritt. I am the building commissioner of the town. And I did some additional research just to make sure that we know exactly what we're talking about here. Etika did the actual review, zoning review and all that. I did some additional research. I have some handouts for everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One to spare. I have one more. Can you? Yeah, just. Thank you much. Okay. The first thing I took a look at was the finding of fact. It's on the first page we have right here. And it says that the second dwelling has been located on the subject since 1964 and was constructed as a single-family residence originally. If you look at the packet, and I did some research through Indianapolis as well as some of the sales on it, it appears as though this house was built in 1925. The oldest picture you have right here is a 1937 picture, and it does show both structures. I also put the one that has the owner's name on it as well, that shows both. The one with the owner's name on it is the 1937, the other is a 1956. Okay, so those aren't very good, but just like they showed in theirs, it has been there for quite a while. And it was built as an accessory structure to the main structure. And as for the size of the original home, it was very consistent back then. They would be a little bit smaller than the 900 square feet, okay? So you will have some 800s, 850s, all that. And many of the homes, there was probably about 30 of them in that area that were built 1925, 1926, 27, and 28 that are very similar styles to these homes. You can tell because of the block on them. That shows some of the age of the older homes. It has that integrated block and whatever, and the siding is that way. So it was an accessory structure. It might have had a living area, maybe quite often the gentleman would have a smoking room or something like that possibly out there. If you also look at the packet, it does show the actual driveway approach for the garage. It shows it where they took out the garage door and then put in the single door. If you can see that.
Oh, yeah.
And then, and these are modern pictures, this actually shows the outline of the old approach going to the alley. You can see that. And I did both sides, and you can see some of the concrete is gone, but some of it's still there that definitely shows the outline of that. The other thing is that they talk about it has access to a public street. An alley is not a public street. It is an alley, okay? You cannot address anything on an alley. It has to, no house ever has an address on an alley. It either is addressed off the front or, you know, a major street. It has to be done. They can call it rear, they can call it whatever it is, but it cannot be addressed off an alley, okay? And it does appear, and you can see that the service door is in the back, that led to the home. And in some of the pictures that I brought and some of the ones they brought, it does show a sidewalk that went from the main structure to the house that shows that it would be an accessory building. Okay? And so I do believe that it might have been used as a living quarters, whether it be family members, whatever, since whatever time. I'm not questioning that whatsoever. Okay? And in Speedway, there is a difference between a non-conforming accessory use being used differently as is, and there are probably 5 in the town, but calling that a separate residence is much different than having an accessory structure being a non-conforming use than calling it a conforming use. Once you call it a separate residence, it becomes a residence, not an accessory structure with a non-conforming use. Do you understand the difference there? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So
Sorry, I understand the difference. I don't understand the implication of that.
What I'm saying is you have a 546 square foot garage that has either a 1-bedroom or a main living structure. That, if it's been done for many years, is a non-conforming zoning use, but that does not make it a single-family structure. That's what I'm getting at.
Thank you.
No, I'm glad you asked, because it's a little confusing in that area there. So and somebody noted earlier, the actual front of the house, that is, they're saying it's addressed off Gerard's, is actually the side of the house. There's no front porch, there's no rear porch, there's nothing like that that would make it a single-family house, okay? And then the town has no current code enforcement issues on it or anything like that. The house has been sold, I think, twice in the last 3 years. The existing condition did not prevent any sales or whatever. But there is a difference between, an accessory structure being used like this and the parking for the rear rental unit, and they're currently using, it appears as though they're using the main structure now as a rental unit, and that other one, once again, is a rental unit. So it is being used at this time. It's not vacant because they can't use it or anything. So I think that's about the main things I had. Any questions?
John, are you familiar with this? This is not this structure, but it just came to mind. On 15th Street, there's a home that has 3 buildings on it, 3 structures that are rental. I think all 3 are rental properties.
That is correct.
Do you know if those have separate addresses?
No, they do not.
They don't.
They do not.
And I know that those were built.
They have unit numbers.
Unit numbers. Yes. I know those were built long before a lot of code enforcement and building rules were made. Those homes date back to the 20s, I believe.
They certainly do, as well as, in my opinion, this does. It definitely goes past 37.
Right.
Okay. But in fact, they have started rehabbing that. And because the number of units, we had them go through the state of Indiana because it's almost a commercial property because they have so many units on that, even though it's non-conforming.
Right.
As long as they didn't touch it, they were fine. But once you start doing a bunch of stuff to it, then that somehow on a commercial building changes the use.
Right. Okay. And I didn't mean to allude that it was anything like this request
No, not at all.
But
not at all.
It just brought to mind another.
That is one of the ones in town that is similar.
A unique
yes.
situation.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions?
This might be unfair to you, and maybe Mr. Rector could answer, I'm not sure, depending on his research. Are you aware of any residential dwellings below 600 feet in Speedway?
That is another excellent point I was going to make. There, other than an accessory non-conforming use, okay, there are none of that size whatsoever. okay, on a lot themselves. There is one of them that is probably pretty close over on 24th Street, I think. One of them's pretty close, but it's clearly a house and has I think a garage in the back, or it was, and the other thing is, sometimes in these older towns, sometimes they built the houses, and this is down by the track, so they might have even built small structures for, a raised person to live in, or, something, because there is, I think, possibly one, Steve, if I'm not.
Those were mainly built in the 40s.
Yeah,
For-
you know the one I'm talking about, there is one on, is that 24th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a few of them there, but those were built mainly for farmhands from the go field.
There.
Originally. That's what it was built for, and they were built right around 1940.
Yeah, but none of them are generally that small, but I think there is one
Yeah.
that is that small, so I did not want to be incorrect. So, anything else?
If I could ask a little bit more color on what the implications are of this
Right.
difference between it being a non-conforming accessory building,
Yes.
and then if we were to grant them being able to label it a single-family dwelling,
Then they
what
could,
practical implications are there for?
the implication is then they could split the possible lots
Okay,
and create two individual lots, and the house, the smaller rental unit, I'll call it, or whatever, could have its own, taxes, could be sold off. Right now, it has to be sold together or whatever the case is. And the problem would be in that, how are you going to add accessory structures? And you know what I'm saying is that it would be nothing, right now, you can add accessories, you can do a lot of different things, but if it would become done like that, then it'd be a lot tougher to alter it from where it would be right now because of these setback issues.
are there any concerns with regards to, I'm just looking at the factual findings I got to make here. Are there any concerns in terms of, safety or the value of the neighboring properties if we were to grant
The value of
this?
the neighboring properties, it obviously having a structure that small is not going to have this, and both of these, the being smaller, if you would divide the lot or not divide the lot or whatever, having that structure that small is obviously, the values could change. Yeah, I don't, want to say too much. That's not really my field.
But in terms of public health or safety, is there anything that's particularly concerning about the setup?
Public health or safety? No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you much.
Are there any other people that wish to speak, either for or against this, that have been sworn in? Okay. Now it'd be time for a rebuttal. Mr. Gilman, did you have?
I just need to make some clarifications. First, we would agree to a commitment, the gravel drive at 5228. It's been there for years. As my clients own the property, we would agree to re-gravel that and actually provide graveled parking so that cars could turn around on the lot and then get in and out of Girard, if that seems to be a concern of the board. Secondly, this is not a garage. This is a residence. This is a living quarters. As I mentioned, there may have been a garage entrance that the building commissioner has shared with us, Mr. Merritt, that has been converted to enlarge the living area to the entire structure. It's not like accessory structures that are converted. This has had a separate address, separate utilities, since 1964. I can't go back and tell you in 1925 that it was a garage and converted from 25 to 64, nor that I think Mr. Merritt has that much evidence to be convincing that that in fact was the case. Those pictures are so grainy. I stopped at 62 because anything beyond 62 is just a guess of what was there and what wasn't there. You absolutely cannot say that was a garage that's been converted. The house does have an entrance from the alley. It does have an entrance on the north side. There's no ordinance requirement that says your front porch has to face the road frontage. There are many structures in Speedway where the side may be the frontage and you walk around to the front of the house. It's just the way the lots were arranged at the time and the type of style of home the owner wanted to put on it at that time, back even before the ordinances were written. The lot is roughly 12,000 square feet. D5 only requires 5,000. So even if these properties were ever subdivided, they both meet the minimum lot area. There's 77 feet of frontage of distance between 1805 and Girard, that accessory structures or, add-ons or anything that a homeowner may want to do to that property would have plenty of room to do it. There are no restrictions because of these deficit setbacks that would restrict that lot, even if it were subdivided, to still meet the standards of the lot area. I'm not an appraiser, neither is Mr. Merritt, but we do have, when you talk about property values, we do have affidavits indicating, and this is the owner immediately to the north, I believe, that is one of the most impacted neighbors, and he's acknowledged that this has always been there. He has an affidavit. That affidavit's on file with the variance, so he's not concerned about his property value, or I'm certain that he wouldn't have signed that affidavit or he'd have been here tonight to remonstrate. Again, when you talk about 900 square feet versus 583 square feet, this was the structure, and the structure at 5228 was built before the ordinance was approved to establish that minimum square footage of 660 on the first floor, 900 for multiple stories. So it's not really fair to judge us on today's standards on structures that are built 53 years ago. Again, we think that we do have a unique situation with the age of these structures. We do think we've proven to you that we've got plenty of documentation that these structures are not garage converted, that they are established under numerous documentations as two separate dwellings with separate utilities, separate 911 addresses that are assigned. It does have access to a public street off the alley. That's its access, is the alley to Girard. When you say it doesn't have public access to a street, that means it's landlocked or it's got access via an easement. You could easily go down the public alley to Girard, to and from this property, with any utility, with any goods and service provider, and with any emergency vehicle. So that is not an issue, in our opinion. We hope that you would grant us this variance with the condition that we would, in fact, add a little bit more definition on the drive to 5228 and add some off-street parking stalls. Again, 1805 already has its parking established, and it is not within the right-of-way of the alley. It's off-site. With that, I'll answer questions that members of the board have, or Mr. Merritt or any other members in the audience. Thank you.
I think there was information in an earlier submission that indicated this property would be subdivided.
What we wanted to do, there is the potential that that could happen, and I wanted to demonstrate, if it did happen, how these lots could still stand alone and serve on their own merits.
If this was subdivided, it would not be required to come back through. Would it be required to come back through the BZA? It would not.
It wouldn't come back through the BZA. However, we would be required to file a plat, minor plat, and go through the plat process to make sure lot lines, easements, access, everything is all set up the way the ordinance would require.
Is
Because, sorry, the one concern I have is going back to the finding of facts. By doing that, and if the lot were subdivided, general welfare of the community is very fuzzy, but if the lot is subdivided and you've got two, you now have tax deductions available for both properties now available. So does a potential decrease in tax revenue into the town from this represent injury to general welfare, in your opinion?
I don't see how you would have a tax deduction or,
Well, if somebody else buys it, and it's a residential, there are now tax deductions for their property
for
taxes.
their homestead.
Homestead, yes, exactly, homestead and the like.
I mean, everybody's entitled to that.
Yeah.
But, that's just an incentive to buy homes. And I think over the long run, you're going to be gaining two tax rolls off these two properties instead of just the one. You would have two assessed values, two separate parcels, two land appraisals for two lots that meet the standards of the D5 district. So I think you could be on the upside in the long run by subdividing it if that should occur.
Philip?
Let's just look at the picture that Mr. Merritt submitted. Is there postal service already to the 1805 address?
If you look at one of Mr. Merritt's handouts, there's a mailbox with the address on it. Is that right to the side of the house? Yeah.
That is the only thing that recognizes it. It is not recognized by Indianapolis if you do the map search, but it does have a postal address. It certainly does.
And it's recognized by your utility company, because
Right.
you get a utility bill there.
Thank you.
And it has a separate sewer line too, right?
Separate sewer line that's been cambered, and it's in good condition, and that was actually asked of us early on is, hey, we want to take a look at that just to make sure, and in fact, it is separate and in good working condition.
It's good to know that because they did a lot of strange hookups back in those days.
That's exactly why it was asked
I
of
live
us.
in an old house, so I know in the older part of Speedway, so.
Absolutely, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to flesh out and maybe harping a little bit on the hardship side of it here, but if you had to go through this alternative process that you were talking about, and is that filing in the circuit court or?
No.
Where is that?
No, that would be, it's called a legally established nonconforming use certificate. And it's a little bit odd now because the planners in Indianapolis would represent petitions like that here in Speedway. They don't anymore. And so we felt that it was more appropriate to come to this board. But that is the other alternative, is to, provide 53 years of unbroken documentation to legally establish it.
I assume there'd be some sort of cost associated with pursuing that route, or?
Just the fact that we really didn't have a staff in Indianapolis that is used to filing and reviewing those, that is responsible to report to Speedway, made a difference. And if you've done it, 53 years, it's a long stretch. It's not something that is, obvious by just some aerial photographs or some affidavits. That's a long duration to prove an unbroken chain all the way through. About, I'm going to say 180 pages out of the Haynes crisscrossed affidavits, aerial photographs, some of which are going to be grainy. At the end of the day, if some of the photographs are grainy, they may not approve that certificate because in 1966, it was too grainy to tell, but that's the only grainy photo that was in the whole batch. And when we get into situations like that, and I've been there, the staff says, you've proven enough to convince us. So let's just go through the variance and use that as your evidence and your documentation for the variance grant, as opposed to us putting it on a certificate saying that it's without question and undisputable.
And just so I'm clear, the two variances requested, then the development standard is that we're going to be voting to say that this dwelling is under the standard of 900 feet. That's for this development standard. The other petition for the variance of use is for the fact that we're going to determine to approve or deny that there's two structures on
On a single.
the
parcel.
property, on a single property, okay. Okay. I just needed to get that straight in my head, because this is a very unusual petition, so, at least before this board. Are there any other questions for Mr. Gelman?
Well, and then specifically with regards to the use one, because we have that higher burden, the unusual and unnecessary hardship, if you could articulate that as best as possible.
Well, if the use isn't acknowledged and granted, then theoretically, that couldn't be used as a residence any longer. It would be sort of I don't know what it would be. It would just be an accessory building that has sewer and water running to it, period. But you wouldn't be able to, and Mr. Merritt may be able to comment, what we want to do is make sure that it can be occupied. And we would fully cooperate with the Speedway and Mr. Merritt if, to go through it to make sure that it does meet current, codes for electrical, plumbing, and egress and window egress for emergency access. But that's what we're trying to do, is establish that it can be there for human occupancy and it's legal. And without that, then there's a big question mark of, should humans be occupying it and is it safe? We think it is. We think it's established in that manner. And we're willing to agree to, work with the building department to make sure that it is up to code as far as safety standards.
Okay.
Plumbing, water, electrical, things like that.
Okay. Anything else? Is there anyone else to remonstrate or rebuttal, I should say? Okay, if not, I would like entertain a motion for a vote on this petition.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Second, okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, aye. All right, I will pass out, looks like we have two, let's see here. I got two ballots. I think they say the same thing, but one will be for the use and one will be for the development standard, I guess. You didn't make a separate ballot, did you, that was specifically for, I can't tell the difference. I think they all stay the same thing, but I think we can, so I'm going to hand you each two ballots. Actually, we could write on each one. One is for use and one is for development standard.
Are we going to require the commitment for the gravel lot? They offered it, but I don't know that we are requiring it.
If we approve it, if we deny it, it would be a moot point.
Correct. But if it's approved,
we would-
that would be based on that commitment as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Good point.
Okay, and so we're just going to, like in the top right-hand corner, put one as use and one's development
Right, yeah,
standards?
write the word use on one and write the word development standards on the other.
So I think to your point, it probably, for those of us who are considering voting yes, maybe if we do want to put that subject, we would write that on here.
No, that would be
Subject to-
stated, that'll be stated after the secretary reads the votes.
But if we're only voting yes, subject to the requirement on the driveway, how's the requirement on the driveway handled?
Oh, and the approval, if it's approved, the approval letter will have that statement in there, that it's only approved subject to the commitment to improve, to add the gravel driveway.
Okay.
So what we do tonight, if we vote in favor of it, then this week or next week, Eder will draft a letter, a formal letter that will go to Mr. Gilman, and it'll state in there that it was approved on this date, subject to the following conditions. Okay, that's if it's approved. Okay.
That's a stipulation. You'll have it wrote in there.
My vote doesn't require that stipulation, but if somebody else did
Right.
want to require that stipulation, they might.
Okay, so we want to pass, we passed these down to the secretary, Mr. Secretary. No, you're the secretary, you have to
Yeah,
read
well,
them.
I thought you were,
No, the secretary
you were
reads.
doing them
So
tonight.
you put the ones for use in one pile.
Okay.
And the development standard in the other. We haven't done this for a while, so bear with us.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Secretary, you're ready to read the vote?
Yeah, just give me just a second. Okay. What's this?
That's
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 for the use.
Or in favor?
Yeah, in
Okay.
favor. And 4 for the developmental standards.
Okay,
Okay, 4-0.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
okay. If there's no other business to come before, is there any other business to come before the board this evening? Okay. Sorry for the lengthy meeting tonight, but again, this was fairly complicated. But Mr. Gilman, thank you for all the work you did, and Mr. Merritt, also for you for all the work you did to bring these facts to us. This meeting is adjourned at 8:07.